Hi, everybody. Welcome back.
Hello. Welcome back to our 40th fucking episode.
This podcast is older than we are.
And y'all said we couldn't. No one said. Did anyone say? Did anyone say we couldn't get it?
Did anyone say we couldn't do this? Because we did it.
We did. And this is such a great one. If you live on this globe, you are affected by this.
If you live on planet Earth.
Right. But me and Molly were in Southern California, and we are experiencing fire season, and our skies are literally orange, and we are just, it's in our fucking faces. And yeah, we're in LA, and yeah, it's trendy to be environmentally conscious, but it's not, it's above that. It's above that at this point, or beyond that at this point, I should say. Like, it's so important, and it's so irresponsible to not make this a priority. And
yeah,
I know we talked about this too, me and Molly. It's just kind of like, it gets overwhelming, and we get it. You know, where do you start? So we want to have Miss Lindsey-Paige McCloy come on. And she is the senior advisor for the Office of Sustainability under de Blasio in New York City. And she's done a lot of good work there. And New York's one of the greenest cities in the world. And we just want to pick her brain and talk about what progress has been made and what still needs to be made and why we need to fucking vote.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, she has a lot to say too. That's very specific, and I appreciate, because, you know, being in LA, environmental consciousness is trendy, but it's often very performative, and everybody thinks that because you have your green juice and your glass straw, you're doing big things. And there's so much more we need to know and we need to do. I include myself in this. I don't know enough, and so let's all take a note from what she has to say.
Enjoy. Thank you so much, LP, for being here. I'm so excited.
Thank you guys for having me. This is really exciting. Appreciate it.
Oh, I am so excited. I busted out my little green.
I love it.
We're going to be green today.
Environmental shirt.
Yes. Oh, gosh, I am so excited to talk about everything because I know the work you do, and I am, especially now with COVID and everything, and just with the fires going on here. But like, I want you, before I get into it, like, to just kind of briefly tell the audience the SOS moment of this episode.
Sure. So the SOS moment is the climate crisis. So you know, we're surrounded by pictures of orange nuclear winter sky and fire and snow at the same time in Colorado. So I'd say we're in the middle of it.
Yeah, this is crazy. And just so people listening know, we're recording this on September 9th. So it's like in the midst of the orange skies in San Francisco. Yeah, there's fire and ice in Colorado. We don't know what's happening to the world.
Yeah, it's pretty bad here, and we're in LA. I know you're in New York, but like we're just saying how we have been waking up to orange, red, gray skies, and it's no matter where you, like, Southern California is just really fucking feeling it right now. But with COVID, like, there's no way you're not going to be affected by this because climate change is a huge factor. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to you. But I'm interested, like, I really want to know how this became kind of a passion for you, and like, what did you want to kind of study, and how did you get into it?
Totally. So like many people, I came to climate by accident, sort of. So I grew up, when I was growing up, my dad was in the Marines, so we moved a lot. So I have experienced many of our country's public school systems, many of our different amounts of funding for science curriculums, approaches to teaching evolution in schools, etc., all across this great country. But I actually, when I was in elementary school, I actually lived in Central California. So we lived in Monterey. My dad was at the Naval Postgraduate School there. Which, like, when you're in first grade, and that is an incredible time to be immersed in a school that really cares about the environment and is really embedded in, like, we're going to go watch, like, the monarch butterfly migration. We're also going to tell you about how everybody's destroying all the milkweed and the monarchs are dying. So I was pretty, like, devastated every day because of, like, some sort of plant crisis. But then I just sort of always have been interested in sort of, like, being kind of chronically helpful almost, and sort of wanting to work on things that have impact for people. I also could never conceptualize of a job that was not in government, because that's everybody in my family has worked for the government. I had no idea what people did. It's like, you can work at like a store, you can work at a restaurant, or you can work at the government. I don't know what you do at like at a business. Yeah. Like, I don't understand. Still to this day, it would be hard for me to tell you. Yeah. So I went to school for mechanical engineering. So I was interested in kind of like systems-based thinking, but also like deeply practical. I was just like, well, I'm not going to go to expensive college for something that isn't going to guaranteed get me a job. So I studied mechanical engineering and focused on material science there.
Interesting. Wait, what is that?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because so I don't know. So I was never like a particularly talented mechanical engineer. Okay. It sort of like requires you to be super, super detail oriented, like really sort of like mechanically fluent. Like people, like everybody in my classes had been like working on cars since they were 5 years old. And I didn't really know how to use a hammer. Like I kind of did, but like not really. But the things that I really liked were sort of like almost more kind of, creative is the wrong word, but like fluid is really the only way that I can think about it. So like material science is kind of like physics, chemistry, and mechanical engineering sort of all put together. So sort of thinking about like fundamental properties of materials, like what happens when you heat up steel, like what do the crystals do?
Oh, I see.
How do you like transform one material into another?
Like how the properties change? Exactly.
So I got really interested in sort of like the materials that go into making things like solar cells or new kinds of fuels. Or like, what do you use to coat the insides of a nuclear reactor so it doesn't get too hot? Like all that kind of stuff is like really fascinating to me. So I got really into that. And then my internships were all kind of in like product development world. So I worked on some stuff in like the global development realm, sort of like designing vaccine thermoses, that kind of stuff. Which was all really cool. It did take me a while to kind of learn that maybe it wasn't awesome for like a 21-year-old white woman from Tennessee to be like, this is how I should design a vaccine chain for all of sub-Saharan Africa. Like, I totally know how to do that. Like, why not? It was sort of in those like halcyon days of like, oh, if we make a water pump on Kickstarter, it will fix Africa, right? Yeah. That was sort of the mode. And so I sort of eventually was like, this is weird. I don't know. Maybe this isn't the spot.
This feels wrong.
It's a little bit. So my, I know everybody always talks about their politics getting more conservative as they get older. I like definitely went from a very middle of the road, like la-da-da, global development to like, nope, very quickly. Yeah. And then after school, I actually was going to go work on cars. So I was going to work for a car company. And then both through some like circumstances under my control and circumstances not under my control, ended up in New York instead. And ended up at a power company of all places. So my first job at a school as like a tiny little 21-year-old girl was like working with power plant operators to help them design power plant control interfaces. Wow. Which was like so hard. Mostly because those guys really just wanted me to figure out how to make lunch break really long. They were amazing, like super talented, super brilliant, but they like definitely saw their way to sort of like a chill day at work when they knew one when they saw one.
Wow. I feel like, cool. I mean, this is maybe jumping ahead, but I just feel like, how are you not working for Elon Musk at this point?
I know.
Well, so here's the problem with me is that I don't believe in money.
That's why. Like, got it.
That's sort of how I kind of ended up back over here. So, I think I sort of, and I don't know. So the first power company I worked at was it was like a public-private thing. Like I know there's a few utilities in California as well that are sort of more state-owned or like more sort of municipally owned. Like Sacramento has a municipal utility, for example, that's pretty much controlled by the city government and essentially like elected representatives. So it was kind of similar to that, but for New York State. And I was just like, oh, this is a great idea. Like public ownership, public control of an asset that's like fundamentally for the public good. Like that makes sense. Like I don't really necessarily know why people are trying to make like historic profit margins on electricity, which is something that everybody needs to have. Right. So that was kind of
think about that.
I know, right? It's like the idea that, I mean, like Con Ed, which is our utility here, I think has like some of the the highest guaranteed profits and returns like of any company, because they get this is really like jumping into the weeds, but utilities, especially in places where they're not like all controlled by one utility or not all controlled by the state, they get like what's called guaranteed rate of return on all their investments. So anytime it's like their incentive to put money into the system, they are like guaranteed like 14 to 20% profit return, or they can charge rates that would get them that level of return, which is really interesting in the California context because they've been causing a lot of wildfires.
Yeah,
and
right. Well, they've been rolling blackouts too, though,
Yeah,
which is interesting. Exactly. Wow.
Yep. It gets messy really fast.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just like we wandered all over the place, but
no, that's all stuff we want to know. I'm just so what led you to your job now?
Sure. So I when I was working at the power company, it was sort of when this like this sort of newish field or new brand of a field around like smart cities and smart infrastructure was really taking off. Because I was like the millennial with bangs on the team, I got a lot of the projects that were like sensors, internet.
Same.
It's like, why not? Because everybody else was like a PhD in transformer systems engineering. And I was like, I don't know what that is. But when everybody was kind of faced with this brand new thing around like, how can we use the internet and like tiny cheap sensors on stuff, and what can we do with that to like make things run better, more efficiently, etc. That was something that I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. But where this really makes a lot of sense is like, why don't we have internet connected streetlights? Why don't we have internet water meters? Why aren't we using these things in a city context? So when Mayor de Blasio was elected in 2014, he appointed the first chief technology officer for New York City. And she basically sent an email to a class I was taking. It was like, does anybody want to come work here? And I was like, sure. So I joined that first team and worked there for a few years on like different smart city programs.
Wow. And a she too. Like, is there a lot of women?
It was cool.
So sorry to interrupt, but like, is there a lot of women in your field, in that field in general?
No, not in that field. In sustainability, there's a lot more women. Probably because, there's a lot of reasons I think why that's the case, but up until I worked at that job, I hadn't had any female coworkers. Like my first job was like all men. There were women in the company who I'd like worked with, but on my teams or in my reporting structure, all men. So working for her was really cool. Her name was Minerva, is Minerva. She's still doing great. So I worked on that team for a minute. Worked for a few different chief technology officers because working in government is always a fun time in terms of like executive leadership sometimes. And so I started out working on like super traditional kind of like technology strategy stuff. So it's like, okay, we have this new class of technology. We probably need some rules around it because otherwise people are just going to kind of buy whatever. They're not going to know what they're doing. There's going to be internet in benches and it's like, why do we have that? Like if we just buy it because it's shiny, it's not going to be very useful or a very good use of taxpayer money.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time writing guidelines and rules, which I love instructions. So that was like super fun for me. And then kind of like sort of halfway through that job, started working on some projects to look at different technologies in place, particularly with communities that aren't always the first communities to get the shiny new thing. So, if you walk around many parts of the country, there's the neighborhood where they have the, fancy displays where you can tell when the next train is coming. And then there's the neighborhood where they don't have that. Or like where the sidewalks work versus where the sidewalks are broken. So we did some work to sort of build a community technology like planning and learning group in a neighborhood called Brownsville, which is sort of like out in Brooklyn, like past the gentrification lines. It's like a small neighborhood with a lot of history of being like one of the areas where rates of Black homeownership were the highest in the city, highest density of public housing in the city, also some of the highest crime rates in the city. So it's like a really, it's historic disinvestment in that community. It's just like generations long at this point, like 50,000 men incarcerated going to be coming back into that community in the next 10 years. It's like, if you profess to be part of an administration, which is also part of the reason I joined the de Blasio administration, because it was one of the first ones really in New York City to have this very explicit commitment to equity and justice. And so not only did that make the work of doing things like this really easy, but it also attracted incredible people who I've been like so blessed and fortunate to work with and learn from, who are super committed, like to doing the hard work of increasing and improving justice in the city.
Yeah. And I'm sure you know this too, but like, I'm always fascinated with like, I mean, living in New York myself too, and just learning about everything that they are doing. New York is and was, even before you joined, one of the greenest cities in the world.
Totally.
And I did not even know that living there, because you don't even think about it.
It doesn't feel like it. Yeah, exactly. It really doesn't feel that way, which is interesting. It's actually this like problem that we have a lot, is sort of like, how do we talk to New Yorkers about sustainability?
Right.
Because people are like, oh, sustainability is for California people. Sustainability is for tree huggers. It's for crunchy people in Vermont. It's not for New Yorkers. Like, what is that?
Right.
So just like the amount of time we've spent being like, so what does this mean for New Yorkers? Because like, you're right. It's been both a leader in terms of like climate and sustainability action. I mean, New York City was the first city to start issuing a comprehensive sustainability plan. So back during the Bloomberg administration, which was the previous mayor, they basically started releasing these like 4-year plans committing to different sustainability strategies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The de Blasio administration sort of like rebranded it and added an explicit focus on equity to the plan. So I've worked on that plan a couple of times in terms of just like, here's what we're going to do. We're focusing on this. We publish our greenhouse gas emissions every year, which most cities don't do, largely because it's a colossal pain in the ass to figure it out.
Does Los Angeles?
Los Angeles publishes sometimes, not every year though.
Interesting.
Yeah. Actually, like, climate action in LA is really fascinating. I don't know. I'm also just like jumping around here. I apologize.
No, not at all. No, I mean, it's all important, really. You know, just
there's just so much to say.
Well, I know. Yes, because. And this isn't a big question of mine. You know, we're living in LA. You're in New York. These are two major cities. One's one of the greenest. One, you know, it's definitely on everybody's minds, specifically during fire season, I feel like. But how do you feel like, and you already posed the question, like, how do we talk to New Yorkers about climate change? How do we talk to the Midwest and like the middle states, the red states, really, about climate change?
Totally. Well, it's been really, really interesting to watch the progress of the Sunrise Movement over essentially like the past 3 years. Yeah. So it's like, it was interesting because I was sort of like writing this up for some reason the other day, but like almost exactly a month after I started my job at sustainability, because eventually I was like, I'm over the internet. Internet's evil. And I actually learned like so much about sort of like structural organizing, sort of like different kinds of advocacy from all the communities that are working in tech and like for tech justice and sort of open source and community sharing and commons and everything. A lot of that information kind of like led me back to more explicit environmental work. So when a job opened up at sustainability, I was like, yes, I shall go. So almost a month after I started that job was when the Sunrise Movement staged their first sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office, demanding a Green New Deal, which Nancy Pelosi then called the Green Dream or whatever, which was very cute. But you know, at the time, like, so much of the conversation around the environment was still this very, like, I always just called it like this, oh dear of it all. Like, it's just like, everybody's like, oh no, the plants. And it's like, yes, the plants, it's a problem. But it's not necessarily meaningful for people who have a lot of stuff that they're worried about in their lives. They're worried about, how am I going to get healthcare? How am I going to keep a decent roof over my head? How am I going to get a job? Like, what are my kids going to do at school? Like, worrying about, like, conifers is not high on that person's necessarily list of priorities. Not that it necessarily categorically isn't, but there's sort of like this hierarchy of mental stress.
Survival.
Yeah, exactly. And so really, like, especially when you think about the Ed Markey election in Massachusetts, which has been an interesting case study because, like, pretty much, like, Joe Kennedy ran on this sort of thing that everybody thought was the template, which is like, I'm young, I'm progressive, I love trans people, like, all those things are great, awesome, but like, he's not standing up for climate action. I know Democrats like had this hole in the center where it's just like, what does it mean to be a Democrat in 2020 and 2016 and 2018? Like, does it just mean like the party of be nice, or does it like what are we doing? And like meaningful sort of intersectional climate action really, like, it cuts across like age lines, class lines, gender lines. Like, this is something that people who are sort of like more on the left side of the political spectrum really get behind. And so it's been really encouraging to watch climate candidates win races that you might not have thought that they would have won
The
otherwise.
first Kennedy, right? Isn't he the first Kennedy to not win?
First one to lose. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's not win. Yeah, it was
It
so
was crazy.
bizarre. I knew that. And I was like, what are we? It's such a good question of like, what do we really want? And it's
For
like,
sure.
and with everything going on, like, how do you not kind of open your eyes to everything? And
I feel like a lot of it, well, obviously the way our country's set up is just money. And so everything, money, everything. And I was watching something on Netflix recently where they were in Paris, and they were talking about how Paris has clean water stations set up all throughout the city for just free use for anybody. They have still and sparkling stations. You can basically go fill your water bottle with Perrier, basically. But like, they were talking to the woman who's in charge of like the city planning for it, and the water is like completely clean, and it's just that was only one aspect of it, but it was a whole episode on what Paris is doing. And to me, I mean, I haven't lived in New York. I mean, I've been there a bunch, and you guys are both saying like it doesn't feel that way when you're there. It just is like a normal, you don't have that in your mind. And I'm looking at how Paris is planned out in this show, and I was like, what? Like, what's the catch? Like, it makes so much sense. What's the catch? Like, they're providing people with clean water, but where's the joke? You know, because here it's just like, I don't know. I know I'm just jaded about our country right now because of the way it's all going. So I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, America is not the greatest. Why do we say we're the best? But like so many other countries in the world are doing incredible things. I know we have people doing incredible things here, but I just kind of want to hear your opinion on like those Paris, for example, because they're leading the way in a lot of areas
and
as
we're
well.
out of the Paris Agreement now.
Yeah, totally. Well, so that's like, it's a super fascinating, just like close study of like so many things that are wrong. So there's a couple of things that I think about when I think about things like that. One is when you think about how to talk about and demonstrate and bring people along in a conversation around sustainability, there's sort of a mix of like, what do you do that's super visible and super tangible? And then what do you do to make it so seamless that it's like you don't even know that you have to do something different? Right. So there's an interesting balance there. So like thinking about how do we, because like New York City has the cleanest tap water in the United States, in like many places in the world. You can just fill up from any tap. You know, of course, like if you're living in a building where the landlord or anybody hasn't changed the lead lines in like 25 years, then you could have a problem. But like there, you know, anytime that you're just sort of like in most buildings in the city, you're cool to get like a glass of water. But that act of having those things in public and those things be like accessible and super visible to people, like reminds people in Paris in a way that you're not reminded in New York City of like, this is an important asset. Also, you should be taking advantage of this asset because we've gone out of our way to make it easy for you to do that. And
they had like vending machines that don't have bottled water. They have empty bottles. So you can just get one of those and fill it up at a station or reuse it. And homeless people have access to water for bathing. Yeah.
Yeah. And which is also super interesting because like people in the US are, and this has actually come out a lot around COVID. So one of the policy areas I've worked on a lot is around plastics and reusable items and single use and that kind of thing. People in the US think so many things are gross that are not gross. That people in other countries are like, this is normal.
Like cloth diapers and
exactly. Like I have friends who are just like, I can't use a reusable water bottle because it'll have germs. And I'm just like, huh? Like the plastic one that you got from the deli, like doesn't. Right. Like I don't know. This doesn't really add up to me here. But that's also something that's like fascinating, and a fascinating barrier to reuse in the United States. That like if you talk to a company that works like both in the US and in Europe, they're just like, you guys are cuckoo. Like everything is like this sort of like sanitation theater. And it's like not even real. It's like you guys sanitize everything and it's like it's dirty. Like I don't know what you guys are trying to do.
Wow.
So I think like having tangible touch points, but then also the city of Paris has done so much to make like biking accessible. They have free bike share there. Whereas in New York City, like, or I think in LA, it's roughly similar. Like if you don't have a bike share membership, like the cheapest amount that you can pay is like $10 to borrow a bike for 2 hours. And it's like, I'm not paying $10. Like that's too much money. $2 is something I'm willing to pay for like $10 is not that price. So yeah. And then also thinking about like, what was I going to say? Sort of the kind of underlying infrastructure that also supports something like that. Like, does it matter whether you can see it or not? Like, New York is particularly sustainable because of like our mass transit systems, because of our density, and things like that. So we've noticed that post-COVID, as people are worried about getting back on the train, are getting worried about getting back on the bus. Of course, like there's a lot of people in New York who don't have an option to not take the bus. So that's a whole different conversation. Yeah. But people with the means to get in a car are taking cars, which is not great for our air quality in the city, for
traffic.
For traffic. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like the beating heart of New York City in so many ways. So like, people aren't just taking the subway because it's environmentally friendly. They're taking the subway because it gets you to where you need to go way faster than getting in a car. For $2.75, you can go anywhere. So, and I know that's something that's kind of like made it difficult for people to really adopt mass transit at scale in LA, just because there isn't that sort of, you can't just like walk into the subway in LA and go anywhere you want to go. Like it takes you to a couple places.
Yeah, but it's also so like when you're in New York and you're down there in the subway, there's so many people. And when you go in LA, like the last time I took it was like a year after, was 2012 or something. Wow. And I went down there with my girlfriend. It was just two of us.
2015.
And I was like, there's nobody. It's like us and like two sketchy looking men down the way and nobody else is down there. It feels very unsafe. Like someone could attack us at any point and no one else is down there. There's like once in a while you see a security guard, but like it's the safety issue of it all. I know stuff can happen in New York there too, but like there's people around all the time, it's like it's well lit.
That perception of emptiness is super, super tangible. And I mean, I would be in a similar position, I'd imagine, if the subway was empty every day here. I wouldn't feel comfortable just hopping on it at 2 a.m. Or like, especially if I had just moved here. Now I'm just like, well, we live kind of close to the end of a subway line now. So there were a couple times when I would ride the subway, like back when anyone would do anything. And it would be like 2 a.m. and there'd be guys just like passing around cigarettes in the subway car. It's 2 a.m. at the end of the line.
I've had working late like restaurant shifts in New York.
Exactly, I'm sure.
You see some shit.
It's like people are just like, this is my private space, and I'm just like, you have your private space, I have mine. We're gonna be okay.
Wait, I'm curious. Like, well, actually, first, I'm curious. Why did we get out of the Paris Agreement, in your opinion? Like, why do you think he pulled us out?
So the Trump administration doesn't like being told what to do. And there's sort of this notion. Yeah, I know, crazy, right? And there's sort of this notion that, well, I mean, like most business leaders in the United States were sort of just like chomping at the bit to get us out of this because there's a lot of, so there are some businesses who are very open, or like, moneyed interests in the country that are very open about the fact that they don't give two shits about like whether the planet burns or not. And then there's others that kind of like sort of say one thing and do another. So there was a lot of interest both from elected officials and from sort of like business and institutional interests in the US in getting out of what were frankly not even strong enough binding targets to get us to a place where we are averting catastrophic climate change.
Right.
So it's kind of like one of those things that, I don't know. So working in climate means that you every day have to both feel all of the devastation and grief that you can possibly feel, and also like this magical hope for like some Buzz Lightyear future. You have to like hold those things all the time. And so I get really cynical sometimes is kind of how that comes out of my mouth. So it just sort of this thing.
We're all gonna die.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, it's beautiful. Everything's gonna end tomorrow. But there was sort of this, I mean, definitely, like, obviously withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement was a huge mistake and a huge travesty. And I'm also just like, well, it wasn't like, we weren't even going to meaningfully meet those targets anyway. Like, there was no evidence that anything in the United States was putting us on that path anyway, because we don't have, like, we don't have an executive who cares about it, but we don't have people all the way down to city councils who care about this and take this seriously.
It starts at local government is what you're saying.
Exactly. And local government has so much control over so many things that have like such ramifications on our climate, like impacts on our climate footprint, like road planning, like choosing to widen an interstate as opposed to building a mass transit line, or permitting certain kinds of construction, like, make huge mega towers when we don't have the energy, like the renewable energy resources to deal with like that in a particular part of the city or the country. All of those things are like municipal, like sometimes not even elected positions. It's like appointed boards and committees. It's like, the fact that, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done to make sure that every person, both who's involved in like any sort of government administration, but even people in general throughout their jobs, realize that everything people do has a climate impact, and you have the ability to impact the climate through the work that you do, no matter what it is.
Yes.
I was going to ask you, I mean, I know it's a really open-ended, vague question, but like, what's at stake if we don't vote blue in November?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I mean,
because
it's so I will be very frank. I had hoped for a different candidate for the president.
Real women settle for Joe.
Yeah, settle for it. I think that there has been great work that a lot of advocates and activists have done to push the Biden campaign further left on climate. Every single day, like one of the main goals of the Trump administration was to roll back as many regulations as possible.
Yeah.
Most of those are environmental regulations. So it's not even like, because part of the problem also with talking about climate is that timescales are kind of long, right? It's like, you know, even though you guys in particular in Southern California feel the impact of climate change like every single day, that's not necessarily the case throughout the country or even throughout the year. But things like mercury rules on like what companies are allowed to emit into waterways, like you could get poisoned from rules that the Trump administration is rolling back. You could get poisoned like tomorrow potentially.
I mean, isn't Flint still like not even
Flint still doesn't have clean water.
Right.
When is it going to get that?
wow.
Who knows? So I think, you know, it's sort of, especially also for communities. I mean, obviously, like, you know, you guys probably see this a lot in LA, but the sort of like underpinning of this notion of climate justice is the fact that communities of color, low-income communities across the country have been unfairly burdened for generations with things like dumps, incinerators, power plants. So that just like continues unabated.
And even like the food deserts that they have. It's all this, it's only fast food and 7-Elevens. And that's all that packaging and plastic and it's everywhere.
Right. Totally. You know, even just thinking about like how people's benefits are allocated that allows them to live in a building that's energy efficient versus one that's not.
Right.
Like, you know, what kind of car can you buy? Are you stuck with a 1985 car because you can't afford to buy a newer car? It's like burning oil every time you turn it on. So I think it's like sort of, it's the absolute least we can do is to make sure that Joe Biden is elected. And that is the barest minimum. If we want to avert like frankly unmitigated catastrophe, which we're already seeing happen.
Well, and also what is something like little things in people's daily lives that we can do to be more climate conscious that we might not have thought about?
Sure. So this is a super fascinating question for me because climate change is not our fault. Like it's not like none of the three of us like caused this. So it wasn't our idea. However, like nobody else is coming to fix it. Like we're all we got. And especially,
I mean, I'm still waiting on the aliens though.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, entirely possible theoretically at this point. I would put nothing past anything. But like one of the things that I've learned working in government is just like, oh, this is it. This is what we got. We got to figure this out. So I would say both like, you know, thinking about the impacts of your consumption is super important. You know, I don't beat myself up for every additional straw that comes home in the takeout bag, but I do like try to make sure that like we have water filters instead of water bottles. Like it's sort of like, you know, there are practices that you can put in place in your life, like around, you know, obviously like eating less meat, eating locally raised food makes a huge impact on the climate. But then also thinking about like, what are the networks that you're a part of? Because like you doing one thing, like last year, I didn't buy any new clothes because I was just like, that's going to be my thing for this year.
A whole year.
Yeah, it was actually, it was really
cool.
hard.
Oh my God, that's
in
amazing.
Like September. I was just like, I want a new
the fall
dress
stuff.
so bad. I know. I was like, I want shoes. I need that. They're cute. I want them.
Yeah.
But then I just got really into like buy nothing groups on Facebook, which like Facebook, trash company, horrible for everything. But I get a lot of free stuff from it. So I'm a little bit stuck.
Does thrifting count?
Thrifting I allowed. Because it wasn't like net new. It was like it already existed. So it's either going to go in the trash or to me. So I'm going to buy it instead. Save it from the trash generously. But, you know, so like me doing that for 1 year is like, oh, that's cute. But like if you and 10 friends do that, then like, oh, that's a conversation. Or it's like, or if you and like, say you're part of like, a community of like, maybe you've got, I don't know, I'm less familiar with the communities that you guys consider yourselves part of, but like maybe like as a music community, or maybe like your neighborhood association, or you got some friends like who work at a restaurant with you or something. Like thinking about how you can sort of like all come in to do something, or it's like, or are you part of somewhere that can choose to purchase renewable energy instead of just like standard grid electricity? Does anywhere like, can you convince your landlord to put solar on the roof? Like all of these things are like, thinking about sort of like, what can I do as a person? Then what am I part of? And then how do I plug into like broader efforts that are happening to sort of like push on some of these other things, like some of these corporate issues. Yeah.
By bringing your community into it, make it fun. Like it's a challenge for each other. Like if you and a friend are like, let's not buy anything. And then when, you call, you're like, I really want to buy this, talk each other down kind of thing. Like you can make a community out of it.
Support system. Exactly. Because you will be weak and you will struggle in the face of it. Like Instagram was so hard.
Oh my God.
Because the ads are so effective.
They get me. It's so bad.
Really bad. Like every day there's new sweat. I don't even wear sweatpants. And I'm just like, I need them from Instagram. I don't even like, why would I wear those? It's so hot. Right.
But
yeah.
I was gonna say like before we let you go, I'm just, because I was just telling Molly, like I'm in like a weird place when it comes to, everything in the world, but climate change specifically. And I'm just feeling really pessimistic. And I'm just wondering, and you were kind of touching on this anyway, like, do you have hope? And is there like some things you're seeing, like progress that we can at least sleep at night with?
I am motivated by rage. That is like one of my key motives. Is probably better for my acid reflux if I figured out a way to maybe not have that be a thing. But there's actually like I was about a year ago, I was like, this sucks. I am like at a low point. I don't know if I can do this. Like I'm not tough enough. There's a bunch of writers and groups that I like turn to when I want to look for sort of like highlighting things that are working well, and also like sort of ways that to point out issues that just like make me angry, but like in a motivating way. So one of my favorite authors who writes about climate is this woman named Mary Hegler. So she actually works at NRDC, which is like a big nonprofit in the environmental space, but she's a climate journalist and climate essayist. She writes a lot about climate grief. She has a podcast where she talks a lot about like how media covers climate and sort of like talking about how people talk about climate. There's a woman named I'm blanking on the author's name, unfortunately, Emily something, who writes a newsletter called Heated, which is like about like her climate anger, which also highlights like really incredible examples of sort of like frontline community led transitions to clean energy, great sort of like work to build community together, and also like points the finger at Exxon all the time in a way that's really satisfying. Youth movements, obviously, like it's super cliche to be like the teens are the future. I am afraid of teenagers, so I like to watch them from a distance. They are like I don't know, I was a really awkward, exactly, I was like a super awkward middle schooler, still have not gotten over the being like, these kids are really cool. I feel uncomfortable. So I'm happy for the teens to be over there and do their thing. I mean, like Varshini Prakash, who's the leader of the Sunrise Movement, is just like an incredible super committed, super talented woman. And there's some incredible legislation that's being introduced at the federal level, both by obviously Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's completely revolutionized the climate movement almost overnight, to like Ilhan Omar and her work on the Green New Deal for housing. Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris have gotten on the train too in terms of like writing and co-sponsoring pieces of legislation around environmental justice and things like that. So I think that there has been a lot of work done for a long time, often led by women of color, and to kind of like get us to a point where all of the pieces are in place and we just need to hit go. So that's the thing that's super exciting to me, and that feels satisfying. And just like more and more people care about this every day. More and more people are frustrated. More and more people are ready to like stand up and start to do things about it. So it's super encouraging to me.
Well, thank you. Well, not only for being here, but thank you for like all the work you're doing.
No problem. Thank you,
I am
guys.
dying to have you on again, have you on again, because there's just so much that's going to happen. I'm sure even after the election.
It'd be interesting to see in like 6 months. It's like, what is the climate story in 6 months? I have no idea. I can't predict anything. But thank you guys so much for having me on to talk about this.
Thank you.
All the
and
issues
I feel
that
like
you guys
we
are talking about.
barely scratched the surface, but we'll
like,
definitely.
So much.
I know. I definitely want to have you back on, and I'm really grateful that you gave us some of your time, especially right now before people vote, and just in a time where people, I don't know, a lot of people have a little bit more time than we did in quote unquote normal life.
Sure.
And so maybe people have the energy to focus on these things more than they were before.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for sharing this.
Of course, anytime. And thank you guys. Thanks for having me. This is super fun.
Thank you so much again, LP. Thank you so much for being here and talking to us about this. We actually had a longer conversation off air that was also fucking brilliant. And we need to have her on again.
Much. Yeah, I honestly think that we should do an episode on recycling alone, because off the air we were talking with her just about, you think you're recycling, you put your plastics in the recycle, but little did you know, if you don't rinse out every single little ounce of salsa out of the jar, that's going in the landfill.
Yep.
And so there's a lot that we don't know, and I think a full episode on that could be helpful.
Absolutely.
And so the charity nonprofit for this episode is incredible. We had never heard of this, and Alyssa found it, and it's spot on. So the Coalition for Rainforest Nations. The Coalition for Rainforest Nations assists tropical governments and communities to responsibly manage their rainforests. Healthy rainforests protect against changing climate, generate needed biodiversity, and provide safe habitats. CRN is one of the most impactful charities in the environmental space, and a donation of just 12 cents will avert approximately a metric ton of CO2, or the equivalent in other greenhouse gases. This means that if you donate $100, you can avert around 857 metric tons of CO2. Just you.
Yeah.
And 12 cents does a lot. So you got a whole range. Do $5, do $100, whatever.
Yeah.
To donate and learn more, please visit rainforestcoalition.org.
Yep. I'm so excited about that. I'm so excited about this episode. Hope you all enjoyed it. And don't forget to follow us at the SOS Pod on Instagram and Twitter. We are on Spotify. We are on Google. We are on Apple Podcasts. We're on YouTube. Just search SOS with Molly and Alyssa, and you're going to subscribe. You're going to leave us a review because it really, really helps us. And yeah, we love you guys. And here's to turning meltdowns into magic.